One of the resources that most interested Mengistu was a bomb that Israel manufactures under a U.S. patent. It's called the poor man's atomic bomb.
A U.S. congressional subcommittee has reported that you were providing cluster bombs.
I stated quite clearly that we have no wish and no intention of rendering any lethal aid, military aid, to Ethiopia.
But the Americans are still trying to save Mengistu, and there's evidence they're cutting off a vital food supply line to rebel-held areas.
Delivery mechanisms that we don't officially acknowledge are elements that perhaps I can't discuss with you on the record.
Just west of the Persian Gulf and the sands of Arabia, another global crisis is emerging in the Horn of Africa. In human terms, it's potentially far more tragic than the continuing drama in Iraq and Kuwait. It's possibly the final act in a 30-year-old civil war, a war that could result in the dismemberment of Ethiopia and the deaths by starvation of millions of its people.
The war has been going badly for the government of Ethiopia for the past 3 years. This was one of the government's most devastating defeats. Massawa, an important Red Sea port in Eritrea. The deadly street combat lasted 3 days in February last year. A rebel army crushed one of the largest and best equipped military forces in Africa. The defeat of government forces at Massawa was a crucial turning point for the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, the EPLF, in a 30-year struggle for independence from Ethiopia. They now control all of Eritrea except the capital, Asmara, and one other seaport, Assab. Eritrea is Ethiopia's threshold to the Red Sea, the doorway to the strategic center of the modern world, the Middle East. Ethiopia has a long history of close ties with the West, but for 15 years was generously supported with military assistance by the Soviet Union. Then the Soviets withdrew from regional conflicts in the Third World, including the Horn of Africa. That, combined with the rapid destabilization of Ethiopia, created both an opportunity and a problem for the West. It was a chance to restore Western influence in an important region, but there was this dilemma: how to protect Western interests without seeming to perpetuate yet another nasty Third World dictatorship. It was a situation which required quick thinking and quick action. The Ethiopian army was falling apart. At Massawa, 8,000 government soldiers, most of them conscripts, surrendered to the rebels. Many of them had to be released. The rebels couldn't afford to feed them. As they trudged homeward, there was little to look forward to. Hungry families and a continuing war which consumes 70% of the national budget. And an unpopular government with no ideas for ending either the famine or the war. Ashagri Yagleto is Deputy Prime Minister of Ethiopia. He says the country must remain intact no matter what the rebels do.
They can continue fighting, they can fight even 100 years. You see, they can seize the whole country, I mean, as far as that region is concerned. This does not mean that a durable or lasting peace is going to prevail in that part of the country, because the war shall continue, because no people, no country, no government can really concede to secession, you see.
U.S. policy is that we think Ethiopia should remain united. We believe in the African OAU principle that colonial borders should be maintained, and that there's no viability in partitioning Ethiopia.
Herman Cohen is U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Africa. He told Ethiopia Americans would help to keep the country together and how to qualify for that help.
Well, when I saw President Mengistu in August of 1989, he said, well, what do you need to have better relations with us? And I gave him a list. I said, we'd like to see you get away from the Marxist system. We'd like to see a better human rights performance. We'd like to see better economic performance. And most of all, we'd like to see some peace process getting underway.
Mengistu Haile Mariam, supreme ruler of Ethiopia, was in no position to quibble with the Americans. He'd been cut loose by Moscow and he needed new sponsors. In the early 70s, he took over an imperial dictatorship and stamped it with a Marxist character which managed to dominate everything but his own ego. But things had to change. Last year, under pressure, he decreed a return to the free market system in a 5-hour speech to his people. Farmers were no longer required to live in villages. They could own land and grow crops and sell directly in markets like this one in the capital, Addis Ababa. His ministers called it perestroika. But in his marathon speech on reform, Mengistu never mentioned the one reform most Ethiopians want to see: political pluralism and democracy, ultimately free elections, which would enable them to get rid of him. Instead, he's hired a Washington-based public relations firm, Kaufman and Associates, to help make a little bit of repentance look like a lot of reform. His chief image builder is Jennifer Hirschberg, former press secretary to Nancy Reagan. Among Kaufman's notable clients in recent years have been the CIA, for whom they managed recruitment on university campuses, and the Sultan of Brunei, who needed image maintenance after being caught in the Iran-Contra arms scandal. So far, the American administration is giving Mengistu the benefit of the doubt.
He's certainly talking as if he is in the mood for change. He is saying that he wants to get rid of the Marxist economic system. In fact, some people have traveled there recently. For example, Paul Henze, who's one of the United States' greatest Ethiopian experts, he says that reform in the agricultural sector is really working now.
Ethiopia is still ruled by the old Stalinist leopard. Do you think he's really changed his spots?
Can he change? Is he the leopard that will change his spots? I don't know, but we certainly, I think, should give him an opportunity to do that.
Simply taking the government off people's backs, abandoning the effort to try to regiment everybody, makes a big difference because...
Paul Henze worked in Ethiopia for years, first for U.S. government interests, including the CIA, currently with the Rand Corporation.
How do you assess the process of change over the past year?
Fairly substantial economic reforms affecting the peasants were implemented. And these reforms have been taken by the peasants, and they really run with them. It's quite impressive in the center and the south of the country. That process has gone quite far, and it's also affected life in Addis Ababa. People can set up shops, people can trade, people can consider larger economic investments, but not very many people are at this point because they want to have a much more stable situation before they do it. But the country, particularly in the center and the south, the countryside has taken matters into its own hands.
Saying and doing are two different things. You know, trying to say something just to influence the Western, the West is quite different from what you are doing at home, what you get at home.
Colonel Kiflu Waldo Raphael knows the Ethiopian government from the inside. He managed Mengistu's defense industries until 4 months ago when he defected. He says the reforms are window dressing. Mengistu cannot change.
He has got the machinery. The machinery is composed of the party, the security, the military, and then to somehow the administration. He is controlling that. I mean, this system is knitted so tightly that it's very difficult to dismantle it. Yeah?
The Horn of Africa and the Red Sea are crucial to Western interests in the Middle East. Because of this, it's vital that Ethiopia remain intact, even if it means propping up an unsavory regime. Mengistu exploited this political advantage, and nowhere more effectively than in Israel.
It would be, to me, tantamount to a tragedy if this country would go to pieces. And I hope to God that it won't.
Uri Lubrani is a former Israeli ambassador in Addis Ababa and now Prime Minister Shamir's special envoy to Ethiopia.
I think that Ethiopia is geopolitically situated in a position which makes it very important for Israel. On the one hand, you have Ethiopia sort of straddling the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa, and you have a non-Arab country in Africa with which we could easily cooperate and exchange wherewithals. I mean, they have the resources which we don't have, and we have possibly some resources which they don't have. And it's I think in the basic approach, it is a natural match.
One of the resources that most interested Mengistu was a bomb that Israel manufactures under a U.S. patent. It's called a cluster bomb. This is what happened last year when the Ethiopian Air Force dropped cluster bombs on Eritrean civilians in Massawa. These images, recorded by a Canadian television crew, sparked international outrage. Cluster bombs explode just before they hit the ground, sending a deadly blizzard of shrapnel in all directions. It's called the poor man's atomic bomb. Mengistu used it in Eritrea 1 month after he announced his reforms last March. Many of the victims in this incident were children. The use of cluster bombs in Eritrea so angered Colonel Kiflu that he decided then that he would defect. As a military person, you knew what cluster bombs were.
Yeah, I did.
Did you know that your country had them?
Yeah, I knew that we had them simply because there was a secret committee established to do the purchase of cluster bombs. And in fact, I said that an Ethiopian should not, carry out a genocidal war on other Ethiopians. That is how to this connotation I made a remark. And I was actually, told by my boss angrily that I should keep my views to myself, or otherwise my demise will be very soon.
A U.S. congressional subcommittee has reported that you were providing cluster bombs.
I stated quite clearly that we have no wish and no intention of rendering any lethal aid, military aid, to Ethiopia. And this is public, and we have enough things to worry about, except that we should be found out that this has been just a statement. So you can take it from me. Nothing of the sort has been supplied to Ethiopia.
Stephen Morrison investigated the alleged military connections between Israel and Ethiopia for a congressional committee.
Well, the Israeli relationship is one which is murky. I think it's held very close. There were, in late 1989 was the period in which the Israelis and the Ethiopians normalized relations. And this was also a period in which you had reportedly a supply agreement. This is according to some reports in the Chilean press. You had some supply agreements concluded for cluster bombs.
Morrison's investigation revealed that during 1989, Israel provided Ethiopia with at least 100 cluster bombs. When Ethiopia applied pressure for 1,000 more, Israel directed them to a Chilean supplier. Israel supplied military advisors to help train Mengistu's personal security force of 7,000 soldiers. And in return, Mengistu made it easier for Ethiopian Jews to move to Israel. This is a promotional video for a Chilean company called Cardon. Cardon is Ethiopia's current supplier of cluster bombs. Carlos Cardon, who owns the company, used to sell weapons to Iraq before Saddam Hussein fell from grace. He has no difficulty finding new customers. We went inside his plant in Chile to see what makes a cluster bomb so deadly. It's basically a shell crammed with mini-bombs and packets of metal fragments, each one more lethal than 100 bullets. In September 1989, with Israel acting as the broker, Cardon agreed to supply Ethiopia with 1,658 of these bombs. They cost $7,000 each.
According to recent journalism reports in Israel and the United States, there was a military involvement within the past few years. Now, can you confirm that or deny it or just clear it up?
To me, this is passé, and we did indeed at times give Ethiopia assistance. Now, what assistance? How? I simply will not want to either confirm or to deny, because it would be irresponsible on my part. I'm telling you, we are now in a phase in our relation with Ethiopia. Ethiopia knows that although it is in very dire straits, let me tell you, the last few days, Ethiopia is in very, very dire straits, even in a state of emergency. We will not go into military aid. Full stop. No, no, no. And this is not today. This has been here for the last 6 months or so.
Herman Cohen, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State.
We have taken a very strong position in urging Israel not to provide military assistance. And while there was a certain amount delivered in 1990, early 1990 and late 89, we believe in the last year there's really been virtually nothing. There's a certain amount of training that's been given. There are no advisors, to the best of our knowledge, on the military side. And the Ethiopians are trying, the Israelis are trying to concentrate now on economic and humanitarian assistance.
There were people in Congress who were very concerned that the interests of Ethiopian Jews who were streaming into Addis in hopes of reunifying with family members who lived in Israel, who had moved to Israel in the mid-1980s famine, that their interests would be compromised if their fate were linked to a supply of weapons, that the motivations would be too cynical on the part of the Ethiopian government, and they would become pawns in a game.
It is likely that Ethiopian Jews like these recently arrived in Israel were used by Mengistu as currency in one of the more cynical international transactions in recent history. The movement of Ethiopian Jews who were called falashes to Israel soared during the deliveries of Israeli and Chilean military hardware to Ethiopia last year. Today, there are 15,000 more falashes camped near the Israeli embassy in Addis Ababa, waiting for exit visas from the Ethiopian government. Because of pressure from Washington, Israel can no longer provide military aid. This, of course, doesn't stop Mengistu from trying to get it. Time is running out for Mengistu. This exclusive video recorded for the Fifth Estate this month in Eritrea reveals the intensity of a new offensive by the Eritrean rebels. Here they're advancing toward Assab, Ethiopia's last port on the Red Sea and the location of its only oil refinery. The EPLF have surrounded and are steadily shelling the airport at the Eritrean capital, Asmara. The Eritreans, who have been fighting longer than anybody else, want a referendum. The common demand of all the rebel forces is an internationally supervised election for Ethiopia. The government resists that. They refuse to hold elections, and they know a referendum would be a quick route to secession. Deputy Prime Minister Ashagri Yigaleto.
As far as secessionism is in consideration, if it is, for referendum, then we cannot concede to that, because it's not the right of people living in a given part of a country, to decide for the whole country, you see. So we don't say that there won't be any referendum. You see, there could be referendum in Eritrea even, provided that the issues for the choice, for the referendum, are, those which can bring, the people together and within one Ethiopia, you see.
We believe the solution lies in going back and consulting the population to choose on how they want to shape their destiny.
Isaias Afewerki is General Secretary of the EPLF. He says the people ultimately must decide Ethiopia's future.
I think that's up to the population in Eritrea to decide. We have said that association could be considered free association. Once the population in Eritrea exercises its basic right to shape its destiny, it would also consider free association without any pressure from outside, without anything imposed upon the wishes of the Eritrean population. The same thing goes for the population in Ethiopia.
The rebel message is clear. The time for talking is past. The people will be asked what they want the country to look like. But first, the Mengistu regime will have to be defeated militarily. It's an outcome that few Americans look forward to.
This is a conflict that had its roots in the failure of the international community, failure of the UN system to really stand by an arrangement which was blessed and created within the international system in the early 50s. It's a war that's gone on for 30 years. It's left several 100,000 people dead and devastated Eritrea and contributed to the devastation of Ethiopia internally and the militarization of the societies. The international community has to revisit this, and the United States can potentially play a critical role in doing that.
Earlier this year, the international community had one small victory. The people of Massawa rejoiced when their port, battered but functional after the fierce fighting here last year, was reopened under an agreement between the government and the Eritrean rebels who now control the area. It allows the World Food Program to ship critically needed food through here. The United Nations supervised the talks and were on hand to take part in the celebrations when the first shipload of food aid arrived in January. The agreement is strictly for aid, 10,000 tons per month to be divided equally between government and rebel areas. But the reopening of Massawa represented a mostly symbolic breakthrough. There is now nothing getting through to Tigray, and these shipments only meet 15% of the needs in Eritrea. And that's assuming that these shipments make it through the combat zones that lie between Massawa and the drought-stricken areas.
أقراونت تزرتي لولاونت زحلو وفويزي قاد هانسي فغري عنقو زجمور ورقا ودم استفر يبغي دلدل ولودو تات أقراونت تزرتي لولاونت زحلو وفويزي قاد هانسي فغري عنقو زجمور ورقا ودم استفر لبغي صنبلاي زحلال درع عنكلا خوينونا لو طلال لازا طعمان متننا ورسو رزين كبرا مليسو نقيسو ويزا غير ترا ويزا إريترا ويزا إريترا إريترا هاجر هاجر ساما خبور زيغا هاجر هاجر ناس نسلو تقا هاجر هاجر نعاخ ونينو هاجر هاجر زعرام نبغوينو قوفو خبر كيتو رائخ قلبيتو زسنبر بودو مستور هوتو ليدو سلطن تناي صباح سجير كيو خرقوا انقالوا تفطري أرحل ولا بري وحس قيح بحري أقراونت تسرتي لولاونت زحلو وفويزي قاد هانتي فغري عمقو زجمو ورقا ودم ستف لبغي صنبلايو صنبلاي زحلل لا زدعمان متننا ورسو رزين كبرام مليسو نقسو ويزا إريترا ويزا إريترا ويزا إريترا إريترا هاجر هاجر ساما خبور زيغا هاجر هاجر ناس نسلو تقا هاجر هاجر نعاخ ونينو هاجر هاجر زعرام نبغوينو قوفو خبر كيتو رائخ قلبيتو زسنبر بودو مستور وتوليدو سلطن تناي صباح سجير كيو خرقوا انقالوا تفطري أرحل ولا بري وحس قيح بحري إريتراي سغفاي بلقي لنا لنا مبسعاخ نحلو خم قدمنا جوخي إريتراي سغفاي بلقي لنا مبسعاخ نحلو كم قدمنا برهويلو بنا توريكي منا روحنا يوتنفاسا سعيرا عبسا عجوغي إريتراي سغفاي بلقي لنا مبسعاخ نحلو كم قدمنا أغلنا برهوي لبانا توريكي مانا روحنا يوتنفاسا سعيرا عبسا إريتراي سغفاي بلقي علنا مبزعاخ نحلو كم